Showdown at Warg-Tooth Crossing. Chapter 17. The three men drew their swords and advanced on Cale, who promptly turned and ran. He ran straight back to the front door of Conrad's store and bustled through the aisle of wares. The three henchmen were caught unawares by the sudden move, but recovered quickly and started running after him like hounds after a rabbit. They all arrived at the door together and lost time as Red directed the two others to swing around the building to either side. They moved off as told, and Red burst through the door with his sword held ready. By this time Cale was long gone. The back door swinging on its hinges was the only proof of his passing. Red snarled and tore through the back door, not even noticing Conrad crouching behind his counter. Both other men came around the store from either side, but no one had seen Cale. They looked about, but nothing was moving, and now that the mud had dried after the snow melt, there was no obvious tracks. There was a house about 30 yards behind the store, one of a row that paralleled the main street. The three hurried up to the house, but the door was locked. Splitting up, they went around the house, but again found nothing. Behind the house was prairie, but nothing was moving there either. "God's damn it," Red swore. "Jarris, you look east. Grant, you look west. I'll go back behind Main Street. Call out if you see this son of a bitch. He didn't just run away, he's around here somewhere." The two men nodded and went looking around the houses in either direction. Red went back to the rear of Conrad's store and slowly went west to the blacksmith shop. For his part, as soon as Cale had run out the back of Conrad's, he went directly towards the house and back, past it, and then into the field. He had scouted this out previously and found a shallow defile not more than 15 yards behind the house. He had hidden flat in the defile and waited. Very shortly, the three men had come around the house, and Cale stayed very still. He heard Red swear and bark out his directions, and after a good amount of time, Cale popped his head up. He spotted the two men working their way left and right of him. Red was nowhere to be seen, and Cale surmised he was back towards Main Street, as he'd said. Cale got up slowly and started following Grant to his left. He rubbed absent-mindedly at his eye tick, while slowly and quietly drawing his crossbow. He leaned up against the nearest house and cocked the weapon for the shot. But as he drew a bead, Grant turned to look behind a house and saw Cale out of the corner of his eye. He ducked behind the corner as the bolt embedded in the wood wall. Immediately, Grant came around the house running for Cale with sword drawn. There was no way for Cale to recock for another shot. He dropped the crossbow to the side and drew his sword. Within seconds, Grant was on him with a massive downstroke. Cale parried and faced his angry opponent ready for more blows, but strangely, after closing and making his first attack, Grant held back. Cale realized exactly what was going on. From behind Grant, he could see Jarris running towards them, and he was sure Red wouldn't be far behind. This was exactly the reason he had ran in the first place, to split them up, but now the plan was coming apart. With a snarl, Cale pressed the attack hard. It was his only chance. He swung a tiring sequence of strikes against Grant, pushing him back. Grant gave ground and used it to his advantage to absorb the momentum. He was tiring, constantly fending off Cale's sword, but he knew help was on the way, and when it arrived, they could finish the traitor off. He smiled through the clanging of the swords. Cale was becoming desperate. He could see the two men approaching now out of the corner of his eye, and since Grant kept falling back, not fighting him, he could make no progress. Cale redoubled his efforts and almost smashed the man's sword into his head with a particularly vicious hit, but it only glanced and did no damage. Just as Cale was moving to help the three from surrounding him, to keep the three from surrounding him, a wall of fire appeared between the fight he was in and the two men approaching. Grant was initially surprised by the sudden appearance of flame right next to him, and Cale used the lack of attention to his advantage. He reversed the direction of his swing and brought his blade down through Grant's defenses and cut deep into the man's torso between the shoulder and neck. A spurt of blood erupted forth from the wound, and Grant instinctively reached up with his left hand to staunch the flow. This left his sword arm low, and Cale reset and thrust through Grant's heart. Life left his eyes as he pitched forward. Cale grabbed his crossbow, cocked it, and replaced it on his back just as Red and Jarrus came running around the nearest house to avoid the wall of flame. Cale pivoted and ran away from them right through the magical fire, dispelling the illusion immediately. He could keep running, but they would eventually run him down and he would just be more tired. So he ran towards where he would have the most open ground to be able to move and try to keep them both in front of him, the main street. Almost back where he started, he turned to face them as they came running up. Right away, they tried to get to either side, but Cale gave ground to keep them to his front. After dancing like this for a while, the two attackers looked at each other and agreed to coordinate their attacks side by side. Cale now stood his ground, allowing them to come closer, but then he struck out at Red to deny them the initiative. Red, who was on Cale's right, easily parried and reset, while Jarrus probed with a thrust. Cale made a light riposte to force Jarrus back, but Red was on him immediately, and so it continued, the three trading attacks with no hits being scored, but Cale becoming fatigued twice as fast. Cale offered an opening by leaving his sword slightly low, and Jarrus took the bait, extending for a quick thrust. But Cale was ready with a quick pivot, and Jarrus suddenly found himself overextended. Cale lashed out and opened a deep cut on Jarrus's forearm. But in doing so, Cale had left himself open to attack, and Red managed to sweep up with his sword and open his own gash in Cale's right calf. Jarrus backed away from the fight, holding his injured arm and heading for the toad. Red circled with Cale, twirling his sword and laughing. Cale, for his part, kept stumbling, trying to keep the weight off his right leg, which bled profusely into the dry ground. What did you think was going to happen, Cale? Did you think you were going to get away with it? We're the goddamn steel crew, Cale. You don't just get to walk away, and you sure as hell won't live after going against us. I don't see an us, Red. I just see a you, Cale replied warily, watching Red. Why isn't Bull helping you out, Red? He's just over there. Cale tossed his head towards the toad. Red glanced briefly over to where Bull was leaning against one of the awning supports of the toad. I don't need his help, snarled Red. Matter of fact, this is perfect, Red added. When he sees me finish you off, I'll get promoted. Red jabbed with the sword to emphasize his point. He'll just use you like he uses everyone else, including this town. You know, Cale, you talk too damn much. Red, refreshed from the pause, hammered at Cale, who had to give back, protecting his leg. Red's sword kept just missing from slicing Cale's flesh. Cale parried and dodged and managed to keep up the fight, but he couldn't offer any attacks in return and was slowly getting beat down. He looked behind himself to see the front wall of Conrad's store coming up, and just barely managed to deflect a swing aimed at his neck. Red grinned fiercely as he pressed on and shouted, "You're done, Cale! By the gods, I've been looking forward to this." Cale kept backing and found what he was looking for with his left ankle, the corner of the front and side wall of Conrad's store. He drove forward with a low thrusting attack, then gave back as Red saw the opportunity to swing at Cale's unprotected head. Red swung as anticipated, but instead of trying to parry the blade, Cale ducked down and to the right. Too late, Red saw his mistake. Unable to check the momentum of his sword, it bit into the wood of the corner of the building. It bit deep, and Red couldn't pull it out. If he had been less prideful, he might have let go of the sword and got back out of Cale's range to keep fighting somehow, but instead his hand stayed firmly on the grip as Cale rammed his sword upward into Red's chest just below the sternum to emerge from the back of his neck. Red lived up to his name as blood poured out over the hilt of Cale's sword, and his head flopped uselessly to the side, unsupported by his severed spinal column. Cale flung the corpse to the side and said, "Actually, it's me that's been looking forward to this." Cale turned and saw Bull watching him from the horny toad. Cale started walking back across the street, just as Bull came away from the support and sauntered slowly down the steps. Cale favored his injured leg, but remained upright with his chin out, looking at Bull until he reached about a third of the way across the street, then stopped. Bull stopped as well, and was about to open his mouth when Cale did something unexpected. Cale took his sword and, grabbing it in both hands, drove it down into the ground in front of him. Then he withdrew a metal sculpture-like object from between his tunic and mail. The sculpture had a flared end on the bottom that Cale placed over the pommel of his sword, kneeling down in front of it. The flare was long enough that it reached the crossguard and rested against it. The top of the sculpture was just a long, thinning piece of metal that eventually ended in 3 branched points. The entire object was about 2 feet long and had just fit against Cale's chest. Cale remained kneeling before the sword and sculpture. "Praying, Cale? With some talisman? I didn't figure you for the religious type." "I'm not," Cale replied, standing up shakily, keeping his weight on his left leg. He looked around. Curious townsfolk were coming out to see the 2 men standing in the street. Women from the Toad were watching from the windows. Eris came out from wherever he'd been hiding, and Quinn stood on the porch of the Toad, quite deliberately not behind Bull. Cale took a deep breath of the cool late winter air. He marveled at how blue the sky could be. "You should never have gone up against me, Cale. This town is mine." "Not for much longer, Bull." "Finally," Cale waved around, "it's just you and me now, and I'm no dying wizard in a dark alley." Bull looked up sharply. "That's right. I know how you really got that ring. You didn't earn it. You stole it. Like so many other things you have, Bull." "Earn, steal, what's the difference, Cale? Very shortly I'm going to reduce you to a smoking pile of ash, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. You hear me, you arrogant son of a bitch?" Spittle flew from Bull's mouth as he yelled at Cale. Cale just smiled and slowly moved his right hand behind his back to just in front of the handle of his crossbow. "Really?" Bull snorted. "You really think you're going to shoot me with a crossbow before I blast you with this ring?" Cale just kept smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained firmly fixed and steady on Bull. "That's your goddamn plan," Bull yelled, putting his hands on his hips. Cale continued to stare at Bull. Bull stared back. Cale kept staring, watching for the slightest movement, fingers of his hand moving slightly to keep supple. Bull looked to the side, shaking his head. Then he made his move. He flung out his right hand at Cale, ring dazzling in the sunlight. Cale saw the arm start to move. He reached for the handle of the crossbow, drew it out of the holster, and brought the stock forward into his left hand. Arcs of fire buzzed around the ring, and a white-hot nimbus shot out as lightning towards Cale. Cale was pulling the trigger as the lightning reached out hungrily towards him. But the lightning was drawn into the top of the peculiar sculpture Cale had placed on top of his blade, directly in front of himself. It passed through the sculpture, then via the crossguard into the bloody steel blade of the sword. A huge explosion of light and sound smote the ground where the sword was placed, and the blade was torn apart and thrown in 1,000 melted pieces, along with showers of scattered lightning. Some hit Cale in the chest and face, burning him, and he grimaced against the pain, heat, and incredible booming sound. But he had already loosed the bolt. It flew along parallel to the path of the lightning. It was molasses slow compared to the speed of the lightning, but it continued to fly through the air long after the lightning had passed into the ground and destroyed Cale's sword. Just as Cale was beginning to wince from being hit by melted sword and scattered lightning, the bolt hit its target. Straight into the side of Bull's neck, just above his right collarbone. Cale staggered against the concussion of force that hit him, and his ears rang loud and hard. All he could see was a bright afterimage in his eyes, which slowly faded. He brushed re-solidified burning hot metal from his face and limped forward. There was a hole with black splayed marks where his sword had been in the ground. There was no sign of the sword or sculpture. Cale raised his eyes to look for Bull as he tried to cock the crossbow again. But as he saw Bull, he realized there was no need. Bull had fallen over on the ground. With each beat of his dying heart, a jet of blood came out of his neck, where Cale's crossbow bolt had found its mark. As Cale hobbled over to him, Bull had his left hand on his neck and was mouthing words. Cale tried to look closer, then he saw Bull raising the ring in his right hand again. Cale quickly stepped on Bull's wrist and pushed the ring into the dirt. Carefully he bent down and slowly pulled the ring off against Bull's futile attempt to stop him. Then he took his foot off Bull's wrist and looked down at the dying man. "I think I'll just look after this for safekeeping," Cale said, as he slipped the ring onto the forefinger of his right hand. Initially it seemed like it was too small, then it slipped right into place. Cale looked down at Bull, but his head had turned to the side and the blood no longer pumped from his neck. Cale sighed and nearly fell over in the dirt, but Eris had come up from behind and propped him up under his right shoulder. At that moment, Barth emerged from the toad and strode down the steps to stand in front of Cale and Eris. Cale looked at him quizzically. "I didn't drink the ale the girls were serving," Barth answered. He looked back at Quinn. "A little birdie warned me it wouldn't be a good idea." "But you decided to miss the fight by pretending to be knocked out." "Well, I didn't know who would win." Cale pursed his lip and said, "I see your point." He turned to walk off with Eris, and Quinn came down to help him from his left side. He said back to Barth, "What I said was true. I destroyed the scaly somat fields. I thank you for your help, Barth, but I expect the steel crew will be leaving." "They'll be leaving, Cale. There's nothing here for them anymore. There's a few of us left from the old days who remember what it was like when we were more professional. We'll take care of it." Cale nodded and then shambled off with Eris and Quinn. Cale turned to Eris and said, "I can't believe your idea worked." Eris looked over at Quinn, then up at the blue sky, then back at Cale. He finally sighed, "Sometimes just a little thing can make a big difference."